The idea that scientific and intellectual inquiry are the most effective tools for improving the human condition was the defining concept of the European Enlightenment, and the elite consensus regarding the determinative values of reason and empiricism profoundly affected the way composers of Western classical music approached their art. While acknowledging the powerful appeal music makes to our most primitive impulses, composers of the Baroque, Classical, and Romantic periods carried out their work with an increasing commitment to precision, intention, and calculation. When Bach presented the first two movements of his B minor Mass to the new Elector of Saxony, he characterized the piece as a work of that science which I have achieved in music. Mozart, whose ineffable art routinely conjures up the specter of divine inspiration, wrote that the purpose of life is to learn industriously and to enlighten each other by means of discussion and to strive vigorously to promote the progress of science and the arts. The boldly humanistic character that makes Beethoven's music so uniquely compelling is steeped in a profound political awareness and a passionate belief in the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity that inspired the French Revolution. And Wagner's concept of the music of the future is inextricably linked to a vision of human civilization moving forward towards ever greater perfection. Nonetheless, as European modernity entered its final period in the late 19th century, the Industrial Revolution and the triumph of rationalism it represented came under increasing scrutiny. While the reductive, often brutal values of urban industrialism had been justified as essential to societal development, the working class and the poor accrued few of its benefits, the fruits of progress flowing largely towards a ruling class of oligarchs that would eventually supplant the old aristocracy. The optimism of the Enlightenment, as embodied in the belief that knowledge would make humanity freer and more capable, began to yield to a feeling of disenchantment among those who saw rationalism being used as a method of subjugation and dehumanization. In the words of the sociologist Max Weber, throughout private enterprise, rational calculation is manifest at every stage. Each worker is mathematically measured, becoming a little cog in the machine, preoccupied with how to become a bigger cog. It is enough to drive one to despair. How can we oppose this machinery in order to keep a portion of humankind free from this parceling out of the soul? There is no theory. Listening is all that's necessary. Pleasure is the law. I love music passionately, and because I love it, I try to free it from barren traditions that stifle it. It is a free art, gushing forth, an open-air art, boundless as the elements, the wind, the sky, the sea. It must never be shut in and become academic. The reactionary radicalism of Debussy's aesthetic, which so firmly rejected the progressive spirit of his era, arose from a variety of interrelated sources. The humiliation of France in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 fundamentally changed the tenor of French political and cultural life in a manner that would determine the nation's course over the next 75 years. With the annexation of the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine and the final unification of Germany as a nation-state, the continental balance of power shifted away from France. A spirit of bitterness known as revanchism swept the country, sparking a new, often hostile nationalism and a deep antagonism towards German culture that profoundly affected the direction of French art. Debussy, a contrarian by temperament who was just 9 years old when the war ended, came of age in this fractious environment, and his music would reflect the prevailing atmosphere of the time in ways that were at once stark and subtle. Although he experienced a youthful infatuation with Wagner, by the time he reached his artistic maturity in the 1890s, his attitude towards German music was unrelentingly disdainful. In the words of one colleague, Debussy was the most violent critic I ever met. He satirized Wagner, he despised and detested Brahms, and he attacked Beethoven with such bitterness and sarcasm, he called him the old deaf one, that it made one's blood boil. This aversion transcended culture and taste. Debussy rejected the entire ethos of development, importance, progressive purpose, and metaphysical meaning that had become the raison d'être of German music. Complaining to a fellow composer, he wrote, "There's too much German influence in France, and we're still suffocated by it. Don't you go the same way. Don't let yourself be taken in by false profundity and this detestable German modern style." Although Debussy's quest for a French musical aesthetic unencumbered by extra-musical implications and characterized by expressive restraint, brevity, and textural sophistication would be realized in a variety of genres, his works in the orchestral realm, where German composers had been dominant since the era of Haydn, offer a fascinating comparative study. And in this regard, La Mer, which marked the summit of his symphonic output, is a telling example. Laid out in 3 movements he described as symphonic sketches, the piece bears a greater resemblance to a formal symphony than any of Debussy's other orchestral works, and he occasionally referred to it as such. Its first movement, titled From Dawn to Noon on the Sea, has the substance and breadth of a symphony's opening movement, while the following Play of the Waves evinces the diversionary character of a scherzo, and the third movement, Dialogue of the Wind and the Sea, closes the work in the manner of a dramatically brilliant finale. And yet this music contains little in the way of a progressive narrative. Its essence is a series of intensifications and releases that mirror the awesome, indifferent ebb and flow of nature, the work's thematic elements presented in a kaleidoscopic array of settings that naturalistically capture them and alter their aspect. But it would be inappropriate to characterize La Mer as a work of musical portraiture. Ultimately, Debussy's art is much less depictive than it is evocative. In La Mer, his purpose was not to describe the sea, but rather to elicit the emotions, impressions, and memories we associate with our experience of it, suggesting the immediacy of our encounters with crashing waves, mysterious undertows, splashing mists, and endless horizons. As Debussy noted, music is a dream from which the veils have been lifted. It's not even the expression of a feeling, it's the feeling itself.